What happens when a man forgets the woman he married is the same woman who signs his checks? Tonight, we delve into the story of Julian Croft and Clara Vance, a couple who defined New York's high society. He was the charismatic face of their empire's luxury division. She was the quiet, calculating billionaire who built it. At a glittering Manhattan gala, surrounded by the city's elite, Julian made a fatal mistake. In a moment of supreme arrogance, he openly mocked his wife to impress his young mistress. He thought it was a joke. He didn't realize it was a declaration of war. What followed wasn't a tearful fight. It was a silent corporate execution that dismantled his life piece by piece. The air in the penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park was always precisely 72 degrees, a climate-controlled perfection that mirrored the lives of its inhabitants. Clara Vance, CEO and founder of Vance Global, liked precision. It was in the crisp lines of her Tom Ford pantsuit, the quiet hum of the integrated smart home system, and the rigorously organized schedule that dictated her every waking hour. Vance Global wasn't just a company. It was a modern empire of luxury real estate, five-star hotels, and exclusive lifestyle brands, all forged by Clara's sharp intellect and an almost prophetic understanding of market trends. She was the architect, the engine, and the final authority. Her husband, Julian Croft, was the showroom model. Where Clara was reserved and analytical, Julian was effervescent charm. With a dazzling smile that could disarm a hostile board member and a lineage that dripped old money prestige, he was the perfect public face. He ran the Croft Connoisseur Collection, a highly successful division of Vance Global that managed their most elite boutique hotels. It was his name on the glossy brochures, his face in the society pages, and his voice that wooed investors at cocktail parties. Most people, even some within the company, assumed he was a co-equal partner, the charismatic yin to Clara's strategic yang. It was a carefully curated illusion, and lately, the cracks were beginning to show, visible only to the woman who had designed the facade in the first place. The trouble began subtly, as it always does. It started with Julian's increasing dismissiveness in private. He'd come home late from investor dinners, smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers, Ambrose, a trendy, youthful scent, a world away from Clara's classic Chanel No. 5. When she questioned him, he'd laugh it off. "Ellie, darling, you can't be suspicious of every pretty young thing who wants to pitch me a hotel spa concept," he'd say, loosening his tie. "It's the business of charm. You handle the numbers, I handle the people. It's our magic formula." He called her Ellie, a diminutive she'd always hated, a name that felt like a pat on the head. Then came the financial discrepancies. Small at first, a few $1,000s on a corporate card for client entertainment at restaurants they didn't have contracts with. A weekend trip to St. Bart's classified as on-site location scouting for a hotel that didn't exist. Clara, who could spot a rounding error in a 300-page financial report from 10 feet away, saw it all. She logged each transaction in a private, encrypted file on her personal server. She didn't confront him. Confrontation was messy, emotional. Clara preferred data. She was collecting it. The mistress's name was Sienna Laurent. Clara knew this not from a private investigator, but from her own company's marketing reports. Sienna was a social media influencer, one of thousands with a glossy, curated life and an appetite for luxury. Julian had recently hired her on a lucrative contract as a brand ambassador for the Croft Connoisseur Collection. Her Instagram feed, once a predictable stream of avocado toast in sponsored activewear, was now a showcase for Vance Global properties. Sienna in a bathrobe on the balcony of their Lake Como hotel. Sienna sipping champagne at their rooftop bar in Dubai. Sienna posing coyly by the fireplace in the presidential suite of their Aspen resort, a suite Julian had claimed he needed for a last-minute solo work retreat. In every photo, Sienna wore a delicate gold necklace with a single stylized J. Clara watched this digital pantomime with a chillingly calm detachment. It was, in its own way, another data point. Julian wasn't just having an affair, he was flaunting it, using company resources to fund and promote it. It was an act of profound disrespect, not just to their marriage but to the empire she had painstakingly built from the ground up. Her father, a steel magnate from Pittsburgh, had taught her two things: never let emotion cloud a business judgment, and never tolerate a liability. Julian, blinded by his own arrogance and the intoxicating adoration of his young mistress, had forgotten that in Clara's world, everything and everyone was ultimately an asset or a liability. The final piece of data she needed arrived in the form of an engraved invitation. The annual Starlight Gala for the Children's Health Foundation, the absolute pinnacle of the New York charity season. It was an event Clara chaired. Her name was at the very top of the letterhead. It was her foundation, her cause, her night. Darling, Julian said, strolling into her home office, holding up 2 tuxedo options. Classic peak lapel or the more modern shawl collar for the gala. Clara looked up from her screen, her eyes cool and unreadable. The foundation is honoring us with the Vanguard Award this year, Julian, for our contributions. I know. Fantastic, isn't it? He beamed, utterly oblivious to the irony. We need to look the part of a power couple. I was thinking we could even make a little speech together. You can handle the serious thank yous, and I'll close with a bit of charm, get them to open their wallets. Clara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Our contributions. He had already begun to speak of her life's work in the plural. He saw himself not as a custodian of a small part of her empire, but as its co-creator. I think it's best if I handle the speech, she said, her voice even. Julian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Don't be so rigid, Ellie. We're a team. Besides, he added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, I have a special guest I want to introduce you to. A real firecracker. The girl I was telling you about, Sienna Laurent. She's doing wonders for the brand. I gave her a ticket to the gala. It's time she met the queen of the castle. He winked, as if they were sharing a clever secret. And in that moment, Clara's data collection was complete. The final damning entry was logged. Julian wasn't just going to bring his mistress to her event. He was going to formally introduce them, forcing Clara to play the role of the gracious, unsuspecting wife. It was a power play of breathtaking audacity. He was testing her, pushing the boundaries to see how much she would tolerate. He was about to get his answer. Of course, Clara said, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. I look forward to meeting her. She turned back to her computer, her expression placid. Julian, satisfied, went to his wardrobe to choose his suit. He was whistling. On her screen, Clara closed the spreadsheet of Julian's expenses. She opened a new file, this one protected by a biometric scan and a 32-character password. Its title was simple, Project Severance. She began to type, her fingers flying across the keyboard with silent, deadly precision. The first line on the document was a name, Marcus Thorne, head of her personal legal team at Sullivan and Cromwell. The second was a directive. Prepare full execution of Clause 11B and 17C of the prenuptial and corporate governance agreements. Urgent. The storm was gathering, but the sky, for now, remained deceptively clear. The gala was in 1 week. Julian thought he was preparing for a party. Clara was preparing for a corporate decapitation. The Starlight Gala was held at the Temple of Dender in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a location so exclusive it was reserved for deities, ancient and modern. The cavernous space with its soaring glass wall overlooking a darkened Central Park was filled with the soft murmur of New York's 1%. Billionaires mingled with politicians, artists with tech moguls. The air was thick with the scent of money, power, and expensive perfume. Clara Vance moved through the crowd like a shark in her own aquarium, silent, elegant, and utterly in command. She wore a custom-made Schiaparelli gown in a deep sapphire blue that shimmered under the dramatic lighting. It was a dress that didn't ask for attention, it commanded it. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, cold and hard as her resolve. She greeted senators and philanthropists with a warm, measured smile, her eyes betraying none of the glacial fury that churned within her. Julian was in his element, a golden retriever let loose in a field of well-wishers. He wore the shawl-collar tuxedo, looking every bit the debonair tycoon. He trailed in Clara's wake, shaking hands, clapping backs, and laughing a booming laugh that echoed slightly in the vast hall. He was holding 2 glasses of champagne, one of which he periodically tried to hand to Clara, who gracefully declined every time. Darling, you must be parched, he'd insist. I'm fine, Julian. I have work to do, she'd reply, before turning to discuss endowment strategies with the museum's director. The special guest arrived fashionably late. Sienna Laurent made an entrance designed to be noticed. She wore a crimson dress that was cut daringly low in the front and slit perilously high on the leg. It was a beautiful gown, but at this particular event, among the tasteful couture of the city's grande dame, it screamed nouveau riche, or worse, mistress. She scanned the room with wide, hungry eyes until she spotted Julian. A brilliant, predatory smile spread across her face. Julian, seeing her, practically lit up. He excused himself from a conversation with a federal judge and strode towards her, his relief palpable. He had been a moon orbiting Clara's planet all evening. Now his son had arrived. Clara watched the entire exchange reflected in the great glass wall. She saw Julian take Sienna's hand, his thumb stroking the back of it. She saw him lean in and whisper something in her ear that made Sienna giggle, a sound like tiny, sharp bells. She watched as he led her, not to a quiet corner, but directly towards the most influential group of people in the room, the one where Clara was standing. The group included Harrison Montgomery, the elderly but razor-sharp chairman of the board of Vance Global, and several key investors whose families had been intertwined with Clara's for generations. This was her inner circle, her fortress, and Julian was about to lead the Trojan horse right through the main gate. "Ah, there you are, darling," Julian boomed, arriving at her side. "Everyone, I want you to meet the brilliant new face of the Croft Connoisseur Collection, Miss Sienna Laurent. Sienna, this is everyone." He made a vague, sweeping gesture, but his eyes were fixed on his wife. "And this, of course, is my better half, Clara." Sienna extended a perfectly manicured hand. "It is an absolute honor to meet you, Mrs. Vancecroft," she purred, her voice dripping with a rehearsed sincerity. She deliberately used the hyphenated name that Clara had legally dropped years ago, but which Julian insisted on using on social occasions. It was a small yet pointed power play. Clara's eyes met Sienna's. There was a flicker of youthful defiance in the younger woman's gaze, a challenge. Clara took her hand. Her grip was firm, her skin cool. "Miss Laurent," Clara said, her voice a low, melodic calm that drew the attention of the entire group. "Julian has told me nothing about you, but your work with the brand speaks for itself. Your Instagram engagement is up 7.3% this quarter. Commendable." The data-driven compliment was so unexpected, so devoid of emotion, that it momentarily threw Sienna off balance. She had expected jealousy, a cold shoulder, perhaps a thinly veiled insult. She had not expected a performance review. Julian, however, misinterpreted Clara's corporate chilliness as social awkwardness. He decided in his infinite vanity that she needed his help to navigate the situation. He put a familiar, possessive arm around Sienna's waist and pulled her closer. "See? I told you she was a firecracker," he said to the group, but he was looking at Clara. "She has this incredible, intuitive grasp of what people want. She's not stuck in the old ways of doing things. It's all about being fresh, dynamic, now." Harrison Montgomery shifted his weight, his old eyes narrowing slightly. He had known Clara since she was a girl. He knew her old ways had turned a $10 million inheritance into a $10 billion empire. Julian, emboldened by the champagne and the proximity of his mistress, pressed on. This was his moment to assert himself, to show these old fossils that he was the future. "Clara, bless her," he said, patting his wife's arm in a gesture that was meant to look affectionate, but came across as deeply patronizing. "She's the queen of the balance sheet, a genius with numbers. But when it comes to the feel of a place, the soul, well, that's where new blood is essential. Sometimes you get so bogged down in spreadsheets, you forget that luxury is supposed to be fun." A hush fell over the small group. He wasn't just praising his mistress. He was actively belittling his wife, the CEO of his company, in front of her own chairman and investors. He was framing her as a passionless accountant, a relic, while positioning himself and Sienna as the vibrant visionaries. It was an act of breathtaking professional and personal betrayal. Sienna, seeing her opening, preened under Julian's arm. "Julian is just a visionary," she added, her eyes gleaming. "He wants to make luxury feel alive, not like you're walking through a museum." She glanced around the temple of Dendur, a subtle but unmistakable dig at the very event Clara was hosting. The air grew thick with unspoken horror. The investors stared at their shoes. Harrison Montgomery looked as though he'd just swallowed acid. Clara did not flinch. She did not blush or cry or raise her voice. She remained perfectly still, her sapphire gown absorbing the light, her expression one of serene curiosity. She let the silence stretch, letting Julian's words hang in the air like poison gas, suffocating him. Finally, she turned her head slowly, her diamond earrings catching the light, and fixed her gaze on her husband. It was not a look of anger. It was a look of clinical assessment, as if she were examining a faulty piece of equipment for the last time before decommissioning it. "That's a fascinating perspective, Julian," she said, her voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. "To be so concerned with the soul of a business, it's an intangible asset, difficult to quantify." She paused, then gave him a small, tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "Thank you for sharing it." Without another word, she turned to Harrison Montgomery. "Harrison, I believe it's time for the award presentation. Would you be so kind as to escort me to the stage?" As she walked away, Harrison at her side, the spell was broken. The investors mumbled excuses and dispersed, leaving Julian and Sienna standing alone in a suddenly vast empty space. The warmth and adoration they had felt a moment before had vanished, replaced by a chilling Arctic breeze. Julian watched his wife ascend the stage, a regal figure in blue. He had a sinking feeling, a sudden, sharp anxiety that the champagne couldn't numb. He had meant to assert his power, to put Clara in her place, but as he watched her take the podium, looking out over the most powerful people in New York, as if she owned every single one of them, he had the terrifying realization that he had not just poked the bear. He had mocked the dragon in her own lair, and he had done it in front of her entire court. Sienna squeezed his hand. "We really showed them, didn't we?" she whispered, oblivious. Julian didn't answer. He just watched Clara, who began her speech without even a glance in his direction. The week ahead, he suddenly suspected, was going to be very, very long. The limousine ride home was a study in absolute silence. The typical post-gala chatter, the dissection of who wore what and who said what to whom, was absent. Julian, his champagne buzz replaced by a throbbing headache, kept glancing at Clara. She sat perfectly upright, her gaze fixed on the glittering, rain-slick streets of Manhattan flying past the window. She wasn't angry. She wasn't crying. She was unnervingly still, as if she had retreated to a place deep inside herself where he couldn't reach. "Ellie, about tonight?" he began, his voice sounding weak in the cavernous car. She turned her head slowly. "Don't call me Ellie." The cold finality in her tone shut him down. He tried another tack. "Look, I may have been a little out of line. It was the champagne, the excitement of the award. The award that recognized my foundation for its work," she stated, not as a question, but as a correction. "Our work," he mumbled, a reflex. Clara said nothing. She simply turned back to the window. The silence that filled the rest of the journey was heavier and more damning than any argument could have been. When they arrived at the penthouse, she walked straight to the guest wing, a sprawling three-room suite at the opposite end of the apartment, and closed the door behind her with a soft, definitive click. Julian stood alone in the marble foyer, the silence of the 10,000-square-foot apartment pressing in on him. For the first time, he felt a genuine tremor of fear. But arrogance is a difficult habit to break. "She's just angry," he told himself. "She'll get over it. She always does." He poured himself a whiskey, sent a quick, "You were incredible tonight" text to Sienna, and went to bed, convinced that a few days of frosty silence and perhaps a ridiculously expensive apology gift would smooth things over. He had no idea that the war had already begun. Clara wasn't stewing, she was mobilizing. Monday, T-6 days. At 6 a.m., while Julian was still asleep, Clara was in her home gym, not on a treadmill, but on a conference call. The faces on the large screen mounted to the wall were grim and attentive. Marcus Thorne, her lead counsel, David Chen, her chief financial officer, and Maria Gonzalez, her head of PR and communications. "He did it in front of Harrison Montgomery," Clara stated, her voice crisp as she held a perfect yoga pose. That's irrecoverable. Project Severance is a go. Full execution. Marcus, what's the status on the legal framework? Marcus Thorne, a man whose tailored suits seemed to be woven from pure competence, adjusted his glasses. Clara, it's airtight. Your prenuptial agreement, which Julian signed without, I might add, the robust counsel I recommended he seek, is unequivocal. It contains a reputational damage clause. Clause 11B, publicly disparaging you or Vance Global in a manner that could impact shareholder confidence or brand integrity constitutes a material breach. And the consequences of that breach? Clara asked, moving smoothly into a warrior pose. A full and immediate forfeiture of all non-vested stock options, bonuses, and severance pay. Crucially, it also triggers the dissolution of any and all affiliated brand naming rights. A slow, predatory smile touched Clara's lips. The Croft Connoisseur Collection. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. The name Croft is licensed to Vance Global under a specific sub-agreement contingent on Julian's good standing. Once he is terminated for cause, the right to use his name reverts. The division will need to be rebranded. Good, Clara said. David, I want a full, immediate audit of the CCC division. Every expense report, every invoice, every contractor agreement Julian has signed in the last 24 months. I want it on my desk by Wednesday. Pay special attention to the accounts associated with our new brand ambassador, Miss Sienna Laurent. David Chen, a man who lived and breathed spreadsheets, nodded. Already on it, Clara. We flagged several anomalies last quarter. This will just be a deeper dive. Maria, Clara said, addressing the final screen. When this breaks, Julian will go to the press. He will paint himself as the victim, the creative genius ousted by his cold corporate wife. I need a counter-narrative. Not a hit piece. Something elegant and lethal. Maria Gonzalez, a PR maven who could spin a hurricane into a gentle breeze, smiled knowingly. I'm thinking a feature in Forbes or the Wall Street Journal. The visionary reclaims her throne. Clara Vance on the future of luxury. We'll frame this as a strategic corporate restructuring, a bold move to streamline the brand and refocus on core values. Julian won't be a victim, he'll be a footnote, a legacy brand being phased out to make way for innovation. Perfect, Clara said. Execute. The screens went blank. Clara held her pose for another 10 seconds, her body a pillar of strength and control. The silent war was being waged on all fronts, legal, financial, and narrative, and Julian was sleeping soundly, completely unaware that his world was being systematically dismantled. Wednesday. T-4 days. Julian's week was proceeding as normal, at least on the surface. Clara remained distant, communicating only through her assistant for logistical matters. He sent a massive bouquet of rare orchids to her office. He received a polite typed thank you from her assistant in return. He was annoyed, but not yet panicked. He spent his days in meetings for the Croft Connoisseur Collection, planning a new hotel launch in Monaco, feeling important. He was, however, starting to notice odd things. His CFO for the division, a man he'd handpicked, was suddenly unavailable, locked in meetings at the Vance Global headquarters. IT sent a team to his office to perform a system-wide data integrity audit, which involved copying his entire hard drive. He complained, but was told it was a company-wide initiative mandated from the top. Meanwhile, in Clara's office, David Chen laid a 100-page dossier on her desk. It's worse than we thought, David said, his face grim. He wasn't just funding his affair, he was building a nest. The report was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. It showed Julian had been using inflated invoices from shell companies, one of which was registered to Sienna Laurent's brother, to skim money off construction and design budgets. He had used company funds to purchase art, furniture, and even a lease on a private apartment in Soho, all under the guise of staging for new hotel suites. The apartment, of course, was where Sienna was living. The total amount embezzled was just over $4.7 million. Clara read the summary without a flicker of expression. This was no longer just about infidelity and disrespect. This was grand larceny. He's been stealing from me, she said, her voice quiet. From the company, David corrected gently. Clara looked up, her eyes like chips of ice. There is no difference. She picked up her phone and made another call to Marcus Thorne. Marcus, we have a new development, embezzlement. I want a parallel criminal complaint drawn up. We won't file it yet, but I want it ready. A little extra leverage. Friday, T-minus 2 days. The atmosphere at the office had become palpably strange. People avoided Julian's gaze. His calls to senior executives at the parent company went to voicemail. His key card was mysteriously denied access to the executive floor, a glitch that the security office took an uncomfortably long time to fix. He finally confronted Clara's executive assistant, a woman named Clara, who had been with Clara for 20 years and possessed the loyalty of a Praetorian guard. "Clara, what the hell is going on?" Julian demanded, his charm finally cracking. "Is Clara trying to freeze me out? If she's going to be childish, she could at least have the decency to tell me." Clara looked up at him, her expression neutral. "Mrs. Vance has scheduled a special board meeting for Monday at 9 a.m. It's for the executive committee. Your attendance is mandatory. I believe all your questions will be answered then." A board meeting? On a Monday morning? A cold dread, real and profound, finally washed over Julian. This wasn't about a fight. This wasn't about an apology gift. This was something else entirely. Something methodical and terrifying. He spent the weekend in a state of escalating panic. He called his contacts on the board, but they were suddenly tight-lipped, offering only vague platitudes. He tried to access his company financial portals from home, but his credentials had been suspended pending the system audit. He was flying blind into a storm, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that Clara was the one who had summoned it. The woman he had mocked, the queen of the balance sheet he had dismissed, had spent the week in silence. But it was not the silence of anger. It was the silence of a general planning a massacre. And Monday morning was 0 hour. The Vance Global boardroom was on the 80th floor, a glass-encased sanctuary in the sky with a panoramic view of Manhattan. It was a room designed to convey power. On one side, the island of Manhattan stretched out like a conquered territory. On the other, a single immense abstract painting by Clifford Still, all jagged bolts of black and crimson, dominated the wall. A gift from Clara's father. It was titled PH-145. Clara had always privately called it The Execution. Julian arrived at 8:55 a.m., dressed in his most impeccable Brioni suit, a sartorial armor against his mounting fear. The room was already occupied. Harrison Montgomery, the chairman, sat at the head of the long mahogany table. David Chen, the CFO, was to his right. Marcus Thorne, Clara's lawyer, whom Julian had only met a handful of times, was to his left. Two other stern-faced board members, longtime Vance loyalists, filled out the ranks. There was a seat for Julian halfway down the table. And at the opposite end, in the seat of absolute authority, sat Clara. She wore a charcoal gray dress with severe architectural lines. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, flawless chignon. She looked less like his wife and more like a hanging judge. Her only jewelry was her simple, platinum wedding band, which seemed to catch the morning light with an ironic gleam. She didn't look at him as he entered. She was reviewing a set of documents bound in dark blue leather. "Julian, thank you for coming," Harrison Montgomery said, his voice gravelly. "Let's begin." Julian's own lawyer, a slick corporate litigator named Rick, sat beside him, looking increasingly nervous. He'd been trying to get a read on the situation all morning with no success. "Before we start," Rick interrupted, "we have not been given an agenda for this meeting. On what grounds is this extraordinary session being held?" Marcus Thorne answered without looking up from his papers. "On the grounds of material breach of contract, fiduciary malfeasance, and gross misconduct, pursuant to Sections 7, 11, and 14 of Mr. Croft's employment agreement." Julian felt the blood drain from his face. "What are you talking about? Fiduciary malfeasance?" It was then that Clara finally looked up, her gaze pinning him to his chair. "Let's start with the misconduct," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Last Saturday, at the Starlight Gala, an event for which I am the chairwoman, you publicly disparaged the leadership of this company in front of its chairman and primary investors." Julian scoffed, a desperate, hollow sound. Oh, for God's sake, Clara. That was a conversation. I was praising a new talent. You're calling a board meeting because your feelings were hurt. My feelings are irrelevant, Clara stated, her voice dropping to an icy calm. The confidence of our investors, however, is not. Clause 11B of your contract, the reputational damage clause you signed on our wedding day, is very clear. Marcus Thorne slid a document across the table to Julian's lawyer. As of this morning, we are invoking Clause 11B. Your client is terminated for cause, effective immediately. All non-vested assets, including stock options, valued at approximately $80 million, are hereby forfeit. Julian's jaw went slack. $80 million? You can't be serious. We are perfectly serious, Marcus replied coolly. Which brings us to the second item, fiduciary malfeasance. David Chen, the CFO, spoke up for the first time. He tapped a command into the tablet in front of him. The large screen on the wall, previously showing the Vance Global logo, flickered to life. It displayed a complex flow chart of bank accounts, shell corporations, and wire transfers. Over the last 24 months, David said, his voice precise and damning, a total of $4,728,451.18 has been systematically diverted from the budget of the Croft Connoisseur Collection. It was laundered through inflated invoices from three primary vendors, Laurent Design, Soho Staging Solutions, and Aspen Interiors, LLC. The screen changed, now showing the incorporation documents for each company. The principal of Laurent Design was listed as one Michael Laurent. Sienna's brother Julian whispered, horrified. The sole proprietor of Soho Staging Solutions, David continued mercilessly, is a Miss Sienna Laurent, and Aspen Interiors is registered to a blind trust, the beneficiary of which is also Sienna Laurent. These funds were used to pay for, among other things, the lease and furnishing of a Soho apartment, multiple luxury vehicles, and a significant portfolio of personal art and jewelry. The screen now displayed a collage of damning evidence, copies of checks, bank statements, photos from Sienna's Instagram, showing her with the very furniture and art listed on the fraudulent invoices. It was a meticulous, undeniable, and utterly devastating presentation of his crimes. Julian stared at the screen, his mind reeling. He felt a wave of nausea. He had been so clever, so careful. He never imagined she would actually look. This is, his lawyer, Rick, stammered, a very serious allegation. It's more than an allegation, Clara said, her voice like steel. It's a confession. We have a signed affidavit from the comptroller of your division, who you attempted to coerce into signing off on the last round of invoices. He chose to cooperate fully in exchange for immunity. She slid another blue leather folder across the table. That folder contains a prepared criminal complaint for grand larceny and wire fraud. We have not yet filed it with the district attorney's office. We felt it was more efficient to discuss it here first. This was the checkmate, the threat of public disgrace and prison time. Julian's bravado completely evaporated, replaced by the stark, cold terror of a man watching his life end. Clara, please, he stammered, his eyes pleading with her for the first time. We can talk about this. Just us. There is no us to talk about, she replied, her face an emotionless mask. There is only the business. She stood up, a signal that the execution was nearing its end. Finally, the matter of the brand. As of this moment, per the terms of your termination, Vance Global is exercising its right to dissolve the naming license for the Croft Connoisseur Collection. The brand, as of today, no longer exists. Our communications team will be releasing a statement at noon announcing a corporate restructuring and the launch of a new in-house luxury hotel brand, the Vance Vanguard. The Vance Vanguard. She had taken his name, his creation, and erased it, replacing it with her own. It was the ultimate humiliation. You're taking everything, he breathed, the words catching in his throat. Clara walked slowly around the table until she was standing directly behind him. She leaned down, her voice a low, confidential whisper that only he and his lawyer could hear. No, Julian, she said, the scent of her Chanel perfume filling his senses one last time. I'm not taking everything. I'm just taking back what's mine. She paused, letting the words sink in. You built an identity on my name, in my company, with my money. You used my resources to fund your affair and my reputation as a shield for your theft. You mocked me in public while you were robbing me in private. You thought my love made me blind, but you forgot something. She stood up to her full height, now addressing the entire room. I am the founder of this company. Every dollar, every brick, every thread of its reputation traces back to me. You were not a partner. You were an employee. And today, your employment is terminated. The house you live in is in my name. The cars you drive are leased by my company. The credit cards in your wallet will be deactivated by the time you reach the lobby. Your personal accounts, thanks to our prenuptial agreement, are yours to keep. Both of them. I believe the total balance is somewhere around $73,000. She walked toward the door, her heels clicking with sharp finality on the marble floor. Marcus will present you with the severance agreement. It is non-negotiable. You will sign it. You will relinquish all claims, and in return, the criminal complaint will remain unfiled for now. A car is waiting downstairs to take you to a hotel. Your personal effects will be delivered to you there. Do not attempt to contact me again. She opened the door and paused, looking back not at Julian, but at the board. Harrison, David, my office in 10 minutes. We have a new brand to launch. And with that, she was gone. Julian Croft sat in the silent, cavernous boardroom, a titan of industry 1 hour ago. Now a man with nothing but a suit and $73,000 to his name. He looked at the papers in front of him, at the faces of the men who had just rubber-stamped his annihilation. The view of Manhattan, once a symbol of his kingdom, now seemed to mock him. He had played a game with Clara Vance, thinking he held all the cards. He just never realized she owned the casino, the table, and the deck. The elevator ride down from the 80th floor was the longest journey of Julian Croft's life. The mirrored walls reflected a stranger, a pale, hollowed-out man whose expensive suit now seemed like a costume. When the doors opened into the magnificent marble lobby of the Vance Global Building, a place where he had strode with authority for over a decade, a uniformed security guard was waiting for him. Mr. Croft, the guard said, his voice polite but firm, I need to collect your ID badge and corporate credentials. Wordlessly, Julian handed them over. The guard then gestured towards a plain black town car idling by the curb, a stark contrast to the chauffeured Maybach that usually awaited him. As Julian walked towards it, his phone buzzed. It was a notification from his bank. His corporate American Express Centurion card had been canceled. A moment later, another buzz. The joint checking account he shared with Clara now showed a balance of $0.00. She hadn't just been fast, she had been simultaneous. The legal, financial, and logistical shutdown was a perfectly synchronized symphony of destruction. He slid into the back of the town car, the door closing with a mundane thud that sounded like a coffin ceiling. He was adrift. His first instinctual call was to Sienna. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and bubbly. Jewel, I was just about to text you. I saw this amazing vintage Cartier bracelet that would be perfect for the Monaco launch party. It's over, Sienna, Julian cut in, his voice raspy. What's over? Did you have a fight with her? Don't worry, she'll come around. Just buy her something shiny. No, you don't understand, he said, his voice cracking with desperation. She knows everything. The money, the apartment, all of it. I've been fired. The Croft collection is gone. They're taking everything. The bubbly tone on the other end of the line vanished, replaced by a sharp, cold silence. He could almost hear the calculations whirring in her head. What do you mean they're taking everything? Sienna asked, her voice suddenly guarded. Clara. She's cutting me off completely. The accounts are frozen. The cards are canceled. I'm out. Another pause. What about the Soho place? She asked, her voice small. It was leased by the company, he said, the reality hitting him with another sickening lurch. It's not mine. It was never mine. So, we've lost it? The use of the word we was like a knife twist. There is no we, Sienna. I have nothing. Don't you get it? He yelled, his composure finally shattering. She's left me with nothing. Well, this isn't my fault, Sienna snapped, her voice turning shrewish. You were the one who was married? You were the one who said you had it all under control? You told me you were her partner, that you were the real brains behind the brand. You lied to me. I lied, he sputtered in disbelief. You were the one sending fake invoices from your brother's shell company. You told me to, she shrieked. You said it was just creative accounting. I have a brand, Julian. A career. You've dragged me into your mess, and now you're telling me the money's gone? What am I supposed to do? The call ended with an angry click. He was alone. The one person he thought he could count on, the woman for whom he had risked everything, had just revealed herself to be nothing more than a fellow passenger on a luxury cruise he could no longer afford. Her affection had been an investment, and he had just defaulted on the loan. At precisely 12 p.m., as his town car sat in traffic, the world found out. A press release from Vance Global hit the wires. It was a masterpiece of corporate spin, exactly as Maria Gonzalez had planned. It spoke of a bold new direction, a strategic realignment, and the launch of the Vance Vanguard to meet the evolving demands of the 21st century luxury consumer. Julian's departure was mentioned in a single brutal sentence in the fourth paragraph. Julian Croft, former head of the Legacy Croft Connoisseur Collection, has stepped down to pursue other opportunities. Stepped down. It was the corporate equivalent of being buried in an unmarked grave. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. His phone, which had been his instrument of power, became a weapon of torture. Alerts from news outlets, texts from shocked friends and colleagues, their messages shifting from concern to caution as the reality of his spectacular fall from grace became clear. By 3 p.m., the calls stopped altogether. He had become socially radioactive. The town car dropped him at the Carlisle, a classic hotel he knew well. Clara, in a final act of cold, calculated protocol, had prepaid for 1 week in a standard room. Not a suite. On the bed were 3 boxes packed by her staff. They contained his clothes, his watch collection, and a few personal effects. There were no photos, no mementos of their 15 years together. It was a complete and total erasure. He turned on the TV. There she was, Clara sitting down for an exclusive interview with a top anchor from CNBC. She looked incredible, poised, powerful, and visionary. Clara, the anchor said, "This is a seismic shift for Vance Global. Some are calling it a ruthless move." Clara smiled, a calm, knowing expression. Business is about evolution. It's about looking forward, not back. We had a brand that was tied to a single personality. The Vance Vanguard is about a philosophy, an experience that is bigger than any one person. It's about integrity, innovation, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. Our investors and our clients deserve nothing less. She spoke about the future, about new technologies, about sustainable luxury. She never once mentioned his name. She didn't have to. The message was clear. He was the past. He was the baggage she had just jettisoned to allow the company to soar higher. Desperate, Julian called his lawyer. "Rick, we have to fight this. Slander, defamation, something." Rick's voice was weary. "On what grounds, Julian?" "Everything she said in that boardroom was true, and you signed the severance agreement. You admitted to the misconduct and the financial irregularities in exchange for them not pressing criminal charges. If you sue, their discovery process will bring the embezzlement into a public court. You'll go from being a disgraced executive to a convicted felon. You have to take the deal. It's the only move you have left." The deal. A week in a hotel and $73,000 in exchange for his empire, his reputation, and his freedom. The final blow came the next day. Sienna Laurent, in a desperate act of self-preservation, gave an exclusive interview to a sleazy online gossip blog. The headline was, "Influencer Scammed, How Billionaire's Husband Lied and Used Me." She painted herself as a naive young artist, seduced and manipulated by a powerful older man who had promised her the world. She claimed she had no idea the money was stolen and that she was a victim of his toxic marriage. She even managed to cry on camera. Julian read the article on his phone, sitting on the edge of his generic hotel bed, and laughed. It was a broken, empty sound. He had mocked his wife in front of his mistress, believing they were his audience. In the end, they were just two sides of the same coin, a coin that belonged to Clara. One had stripped him of his power, the other had danced on his grave. It was a spectacular, self-inflicted ruin. 6 months later, the name Julian Croft was little more than a ghost in the hallowed halls of New York finance and society. The scandal, once a roaring fire, had dwindled to cold embers, swept away by the city's relentless news cycle. The world had moved on, and at its forefront, Clara Vance was not just surviving, she was conquering. The launch of the Vance Vanguard was an unprecedented success. Freed from the constraints of Julian's somewhat dated, ostentatious style, Clara had infused the new brand with her own ethos: quiet confidence, technological integration, and minimalist elegance. The critics raved. The first Vanguard Hotel, which opened in Tokyo, was hailed by Architectural Digest as a masterpiece of modern serenity. Occupancy rates were at 98%. The company's stock had soared 30% since the restructuring. Clara herself seemed transformed. The reserved, almost severe woman who had stood in the background had stepped fully into the light. She graced the cover of Forbes, not as a billionaire's wife, but as the architect of tomorrow's luxury. The article, the one Maria Gonzalez had masterminded, celebrated her bold vision and decisive leadership. There was a new light in her eyes, a relaxed set to her shoulders. The removal of Julian had been more than a corporate maneuver. It had been the excision of a tumor. She sat now in the glass-walled conference room, the same one where Julian's life had been dismantled, but the energy was different. It was vibrant, collaborative. She was brainstorming with a team of young, brilliant architects and designers for the new Vanguard property in London. "I don't want a lobby," she said, tapping a stylus on a large interactive screen. "I want a living room, a place where art, conversation, and comfort intersect. No check-in desks. Your phone is your key. A personal concierge, not a receptionist. We are not selling rooms. We are offering sanctuary." Her team listened, captivated. This was the Clara who had been there all along, the visionary who had been obscured behind the charming facade of her husband. Later that evening, she stood on the terrace of her penthouse. The apartment felt different now, less like a gilded cage and more like a home. She had redecorated, replacing the opulent, heavy furniture Julian had favored with clean lines, modern art, impersonal touches. Her old friend, Harrison Montgomery, stood beside her, swirling a glass of Macallan 25. "You seem happy, Clara," he observed, his old eyes crinkling at the corners. "I feel light, Harrison," she confessed, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "I spent 15 years carrying the weight of two people. I had forgotten what it felt like to only carry myself." "He was a fool," Harrison said gruffly, "to have a woman like you and not see what he had." "He saw what I had," Clara corrected gently. "He just thought it belonged to him. It was a fatal miscalculation. And what of the man who made that miscalculation?" Julian Croft was a ghost in a different way. After his week at the Carlyle, his $73,000 had dwindled quickly. He tried to find work, but his name was poison. No reputable firm would touch him. The story of his public humiliation at the hands of his brilliant wife had become a cautionary legend on Wall Street. He was last seen by a former colleague managing a small, struggling art gallery in Westchester. The Brioni suits were gone, replaced by a frayed blazer and tired-looking jeans. The charismatic smile was a phantom, a hollow echo of its former brilliance. He looked tired, beaten, and profoundly irrelevant. The man who had commanded ballrooms and boardrooms now spent his days trying to sell mediocre paintings to suburban dentists. He had flown too close to the sun, and the woman he mocked had turned out to be the sun itself. Clara never spoke his name again. She didn't need to. Her success was her statement. Her empire was her vindication. She had faced the ultimate betrayal, not with tears or screams, but with the cold, hard logic of a balance sheet. She had assessed the liability, calculated the cost, and executed a severance with the same brutal efficiency she applied to every other business decision. And in doing so, she had not only reclaimed her company, she had reclaimed herself. The queen, long overshadowed by a jester she had mistaken for a king, was finally and fully on her throne. And so, Julian Croft learned the hardest lesson of his life. Never underestimate the woman who built the castle you live in. His story is a chilling reminder that true power isn't about charm, charisma, or the name on the door. It's about vision, strategy, and the unshakable will to protect what you have built. Clara Vance didn't just win a divorce, she won a war of her own making, proving that the most devastating revenge is living and thriving spectacularly well. What do you think? Was Clara's response a masterclass in corporate justice, or a cold, calculated act of cruelty? Could Julian have ever been redeemed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you were captivated by this story of scandal, strategy, and ultimate vindication, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good drama, and be sure to subscribe for more tales of power, betrayal, and the high price of hubris.